Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Blah 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 Art Talk. Yes, I, Matthew Dye, your host, is going to talk about art stuff that's going on in the art community, and this is the first episode. And in today's episode, we are going to look at that new red painting of King Charles that was unveiled a couple of days ago. I know I'm a little late. I'm just trying to get everything organized and trying to figure out what's going on with it. So anyway, let's get into it. So what is this portrait about? Is it an official portrait? Is it that'll be hanging in like Buckingham Palace? What is this portrait about? So this portrait was done by Jonathan Yao, which is sort of like a famous portrait gallery. He's done a lot of politicians, especially British politicians, such as Tony Blair. He did I would hate to say a riff, but he did one with George W. Bush that used not for children's imagery to collage his face. And he's done Camellia. He's done a lot, and we'll get into that later. So let's talk about this painting. This portrait, which was painted by the British artist Jonathan Yao, was unveiled by the King at Buckingham Palace, according to a Palace release shared by Business Insider. It was the first commission in 2020 to celebrate King Charles's 50 years as a member of the Drapers Company, a UK charity that supports the causes includes education, prison rehabilitation, and elder care. So this is not going to be hung in like the main entrances of other royalty that's open to the public at like Buckingham Palace or any of those places. It's in the Drapers Hall company's hall, which was built and started in 1420 in one area, then was destroyed by the Great Fire in 1666 and was rebuilt in 1667. It was again rebuilt after a fire, which did considerable damage in the 1860s. Yeah, and it's in the middle of it looks like in the city of London, and it's an event hall. So that's cool. Anyway, getting sidetracked. So it's going to be hung in Drapers Hall. And then this article that I got from the Business Insider continues. It's steeped in shades of red. The portrait threw Charles for a bit of a loop when he first saw it, and it's half-done state, Yao told the BBC Tuesday. He was initially surprised by the strong color, but otherwise seemed to approve of it. Honestly, I wouldn't be... I mean, what are you supposed to say at that point? It's like, no, just scrap it all? I think at this point, you really don't have much of a say in what the artist does. I mean, I think they just sort of let him do his thing. It continues that Yao's creation hasn't been a resounding success in the art world either. The Washington Post art critic called it a stylistic mess, while the artistic and facility member of the Rhode Island School of Design told Today its red brushstrokes remind him of dripping blood. Yeah, so I shared a meme a couple days ago, and it didn't go anywhere, which is fine. It was just me just trying to get it out of my head. And basically, it's like, I will reign in blood. And that's what this reminds me of. I get that Britain is synonymous with... British uniforms are synonymous with red. But to have a full painting... And this is a large painting. I don't think a lot of people realize how big it is. And to have it in just a swirling red, it comes across as, to me, more like hell flames than it does like blood. But I mean, just to have as much blood, and if you close your eye, squint your eyes a little bit, you see faces like screaming in hell, and that was my first impression. It's like, this is not a good look for a monarchy. This more looks like something that would be done as a joke or in protest of the monarchy. That was my first initial thought, was this can't be an official painting. This has to be where somebody is like, I am irritated at the monarchy, and this is my way of showing it and putting my finger up at the monarchy. Well, that's great and dandy, but this to be an official, I don't care who was commissioned by, uh, who was commissioned for. It just is a mess of just hellscape. It's a hellscape. I'll go more into it here in a bit, but let's continue with this article. Yao's creation hasn't been a resounding success. Okay, I already read that. However, the work of art got the seal of approval from one of the most important people in Charles' life, Queen Camilla. I didn't even think she was queen. Anyway, so his spouse said, yes, that's him. So, and she continues and says, they quote, yes, you've got him. What does that mean? To me, it's like, would you see your spouse as like sort of like reigning in hell? I mean, that's what it comes across as. Like, I'd like to know how Kamala really feels about her husband. The article continues, like most official royal paintings, Yao's interpretation of Charles contains several hidden details and subtle nods to the monarchy's role as the head of the state in the UK, his royal lineage, and his personal passions. Great, fantastic, whatever. Charles's bright red uniform is from the Welsh Guard, a regiment of the British Army. Charles is depicted holding a sword and wearing ruby red signature uniform of the Welsh Guard, a regiment of the British Army that was named Regimental Colonial in 1975. That whole sentence is... wow. Okay. The use of the red in the uniform and the rest of the painting is a nod to Charles's royal heritage, as the color often appeared in many historical royal paintings, according to Yao's website, where he offered further insight into his artistic choices. And we all know Charles is royal. There's ways that you could do it, and I'll show pictures up here in a bit of other royal families throughout the ages, and what they were wearing and how they sort of stylized those individuals. But there were some that I looked at. There was I think, a 1955 portrait of the Queen, and you could tell just by her expression she didn't have a crown on. I mean, she was wearing a cape, and she was looking off in the distance. There's very minimal stuff going on in the background, but you can tell just by the regal stance of Queen Elizabeth that she was royalty. And I think there's other ways to do it other than the way that Yao did this piece. Yao also explained on his website, red uniform purposely blends into the swirls of red paint that cover most of the canvas. I would say basically all of the canvas except for splotches. He chose to fade the uniform out to keep Charles's face more pronounced to the viewers to feel a sense of connection with the king as a person rather than have their attention diverted to his regalia. Okay, this is one of my big things. I don't feel connected with this at all. I'm not a big Charles person. As an American, I'm not part of the monarchy, or they have no control over my life. Although I've been to the UK, it's a lovely place. I enjoyed living there for the extent that I did. But I don't feel like it's connecting with anything. It's not connecting with the viewer. It doesn't make me feel like I want to get to know Charles better, or I feel comforted by him, or anything like this. It's actually doing the opposite. It's like I want to stay away from him, far, far away from him, and not be anywhere near his vicinity, because it just gives off that creep factor. And I practice occultism, so I know it's dark stuff, but this is beyond me. I mean, to say that you're trying to connect with the viewer and all this other stuff, I feel like that's just a backpedal at this point. I don't feel like he's trying to make you connect with King Charles, who, mind you, has had a long history of controversy. So maybe, if not consciously, subconsciously, it's sort of more of a stay away from him factor. I don't know, but it gives off a hellish impression. The article goes on as the portrait artist, you get this unique opportunity to spend time with and get to know the subject. So I wanted to minimize the visual distractions and allow people to connect with the human being underneath, said Yao. Okay, there's ways you can do it. But Yao has a very particular style that he does. And I read a few articles that sort of call this out. It's like, yes, you have a shtick. And I mean, overall, I like his sort of design style. And as you can see, the images floating, these are all different people. But his shtick is to focus on the face and then slowly and gradually, or I mean, a lot of times harshly, blend it into the background. But a lot of these backgrounds aren't hellish landscapes. They're just splotches of color, or the color of like the suit, like in this Tony Blair a portrait, or like an outline of a house. There's ways he could have done this that doesn't look like he's reigning in hell. The article continues, in the portrait, a small butterfly flutters above Charles's right shoulder. Yao said on the website that the butterfly is symbolic of for several reasons. For one, it's a monarch butterfly, identifying for its orange, black, and white colors. As Yao explains in his website, it is commonly believed that the monarch butterfly got its name from King William III, who was born in the Netherlands and known as the Prince of Orange until his ascension to the throne of England. Speaking to the BBC, the artist revealed that it was Charles who suggested adding the butterfly. Yao apparently asked the king, when school children are looking at this in 200 years, and they're looking at the who's who of the monarchs, what clue can you give them? What clue could you give this person is a part of the monarch, other than the... Are we talking about, like, this is out, like, wheeled out in front of, like, some random place, and you have to guess who it is? Or are we looking at, like, the ruins of, I don't know, I'm thinking Fallout here, so go with me. You know, the ruins of Buckingham. Here is this hellish landscape portrait, and we're trying to figure out, and we're like, oh, look, it's a butterfly. So that must mean that this guy's a monarch because of King William III, who is also known as the Prince of Orange. Okay. And I sort of even feel like this butterfly feels awkward somehow. Like it doesn't belong. It's like, here's a hellish landscape and here's a butterfly. It's just, visually it doesn't make a lot of sense. And the butterfly is far more radiant than King Charles's face, which we'll go on about in a second. Okay. The article goes on. Primarily a symbol of the beauty and precociousness of nature, it highlights the environmental causes the king has championed most of his life, and certainly longed before they became a mainstream conservationist. Yao said, alright. Just as a caterpillar builds a cocoon and transforms it into a butterfly, Charles went through a transition period of his own while Yao was working on this painting. Yes, the loss of his mother. Look, Elizabeth, I mean, she had a long reign, and she did a lot in her lifetime. I never thought Charles was going to ascend to the throne, to be honest, so this is a shocker to me. But really, what has he done so far? So, you know, you always go back into, say, like, your actions speak louder than words. I feel like this is almost the same exact way. His action, like, okay, he's all for conservation. So am I. That's great. But to put a butterfly in that to symbolize it, I think is a loss on a lot of people. And then it's sort of backpedaling. Well, he also turned into a king. Well, that's sort of the idea, isn't it? I mean, he goes from, you know, the son of the queen and king, and then becomes king on her death. That's how the monarchy works. So, yeah, I get the symbolism to some extent, but it would be interesting to actually have the butterfly emerging from the cocoon. And if you're going to say, well, he's a conservationist, have a tree in the middle of the hellscape. I don't know. You could have a tree on the hellscape right next to him, on the left side, and I think it would have lined it up a little bit. Trees that belong in hell, right? I don't know. Okay, and the article goes on. In this context of art history, a butterfly is often the symbology of metamorphosis and rebirth, and thus also parallels the king's transition from prince to monarchy during the period the portrait was created. This guy is insufferable, Yao wrote on his website. And to my mind, the painting is like the last will and testament of an... Okay, so we know what the intention Yao was trying to do. Did he do it? No. I do not think he fulfilled it. I think he's pretentious enough. I think he's an artist that is... I think artists go through a trend. I think artists are always pretentious. We always are, but we try to... Our self-doubt and all this other stuff sort of brings us back. Okay, so he's become famous. He's sitting in front of the now King of England. He's asking him questions. They're buddy. I don't know. They're having tea and crumpets. I don't know. And they're talking, and he's painting away at him. And he's trying to get to know him and all this stuff. At what point do you go, is that self-doubt holding you back? And we can see on his website that he's using non-words to explain words. And that's how basically, like, every time I stumbled over something, it was his way of speaking. He's just talking and almost backpedaling everything that it was. And we're supposed to come to that realization. All right. So here's some criticisms of it, and I'll try to read it interesting. To my mind, the painting is like the last will and testament of an obnoxious libertine. It shouldn't make sense. And guess what? It doesn't. So many ideas, or really so many decisions avoided in that one painting. Do we want pretty or gritty, abstract or figurative? Symbolism, note the butterfly standing for Charles's transformation from prince into king, or realism. The illusion of special depth or flat overall effect, dignified, royal reserve, or palpable collapse into pathos. It's all there, a heap of oxymorons, a pileup of platitudes. And I couldn't agree more. So basically it was saying, he made a lot of decisions that didn't come across as any decisions. The whole, it was trying to give depth, but at the same time be flat, and it comes across as a hellscape. The painting doesn't give any sort of dignifying aspect. Why not have him in like a tiki shirt and holding a tiki cup and just chilling out by the sun? I mean, you could have had, get away from the uniform thing. I don't know. I mean, if they wanted to have fun, they could have had fun with this. There were so many different ways. De-stiffifying, de-bureaucratizing the monarchy. But the monarchy is never going to go for... So here's the oxymoron of it all, in my opinion. They're trying to demystify the monarchy, but the whole thing that the monarchy has is the bureaucracy of the monarchy. The only way that the monarchy stays in power is by its own mythos. The mythos that God gave, and as a non-Christian, don't take offense to this, but here it is. The origin of the monarchy is quite simple. At some point, somebody goes, I want to be king of this land. And they go, well, how are you going to do that? By conquest. Okay. So they come in and conquest. All right. And at some point they go, I should be the only person and my family should be the only one to rule this area. And they're like, how are we going to do that? We're going to start a mythology about ourselves. A rumor about ourselves, shall we say, that we are touched by God and that we have the blood of God in us. So therefore, we are closer to God, and God speaks to us to make the rules and make the laws, and that's how we keep rule. It's quite brilliantly dumb if you think about it. I mean, why wouldn't you do that? But so that's how the monarchy has stayed in power for so long. Now, we've seen it chip away over the years, the parliament system and stuff like that. But currently, if you look at like the lineage of the monarchy, it's all interconnected. They all it's family on top of family at this point. So all the monarchies that rule Europe are the same exact family. All right. So that is the monarchy in a nutshell. And here we are trying to say the monarchy are humans too. But at no point in the mythology is that actually stated. You look at North Korea and how they viewed Kim Jong-un and all that. Like, here's a guy without a butthole. I mean, it's interesting, but at the same point, it's like the mythicizing that they are above man, so they have divine calling. That's the only thing that's keeping them in power. And now you produce a painting that you're trying to say will draw a connection to the people, which I think of all the people, of all the monarchs, and all the royalty, especially in England, grew to be liked by the people itself was Queen Elizabeth. And Charles is trying to, any of them, honestly, after her passing, trying to almost compete with that image was going to be hard. And they were going to have to make their own. But Charles, I don't know. It's just, there's something there that doesn't make a lot of sense. Trying to identify with the common people. Because he's the one that was, I felt like, more isolated. You know, with his kids, they did a lot of humanitarian work. Diana, his deceased wife, did a lot of humanitarian work. You know, and after her death, he completely withdrew. And I mean, and honestly, so what surprises me about the Welsh Guard thing, too, is that every picture, or a lot of pictures, you see him in a kilt. You know, and so why not the Scottish Guard? You know, that would be hilarious. King Charles in the Scottish, like in the black watchout uniform, and then have plaid behind him. That actually would have been a lot better, I think, than what we currently have with this. And I'm going to call it. It's a hellscape. It is an absolute hellscape. I have nothing against the Welsh Guard. Their uniform is very striking, but why not like have the gold of the Welsh Guard? If you look at the uniform, why not give the hint of gold or silver or anything else other than the red? And then another controversy is, a celebrity portrait of the most bland and unoriginal kind has been playing his trade for decades. To go to his website and see his shtick instantly. He paints heads with a veneer of slick, unconventional realism and then gesturing at arty insurance, leaves parts of the canvas either unfinished or decorated with abstract-looking brushwork and arbitrary colors. Well, it's true. I mean, every portrait he's done is exactly that. It is focus on the face, high focus, and then everything else is just artsy. Let's just put it that way. All right. We've talked to sort of the idea behind this, what it is, what's going on with it. So I'm going to give my opinion. Other than, it's a hellscape. It is a hellscape, but it's more than that. All right. First, everybody compares it to Ghostbusters 2, The Portrait of Vigo. Number one, huge Ghostbusters fan. Have been since, it first came out. Love it. So I looked at the portrait of Vigo. And I compared it to the King Charles portrait. And I was like, you know what? The Vigo portrait is not as scary as the King Charles portrait. If you look at them side by side, which I have now, it is not as scary. There's actually detail in the background. Yes, we can see, just by the image, Vigo is a sinister being. And he revels in the burning of villages, probably pillaging and other things. And you can see that behind the ruins and the bodies underneath him and the burning of the village behind him. And then you come to the Charles portrait. And it literally looks like souls screaming into the void as they circle around him. look, I have loose brushwork and everything, and but it all depends on, the piece. And here we see there's no car. I mean, I would like to have seen. We start seeing the uniform slowly, but again, it's just, I don't know. It's so eerie of a piece. I mean, this is something you will find in a haunted house, not in a royal unveiling. All right, so let's go into my critique. First and foremost, other than hellscape and the swirling void of souls behind him and in front of him, just devouring his entire being, we are noticing the first thing is his face. And we see his face. Here's King Charles. He's an older gentleman. I have no problem with that. I think overall that looks well. I mean, the captured age and everything. Sort of the wisdom, but maybe youthful playfulness with this, the smirk to some extent. Although he does look like he's wearing lipstick and doesn't help with the red. But, I was looking at it. I did a close-up to just take in the entire picture. And I noticed his eyes. There's something weird about his eyes. I don't want to say sinister. It could be just it takes on everything else. But there's something there. Something not right. So we have King Charles's face. And then we go down to the uniform. And we can see, as all kings are, highly decorated. I mean, all monarchies are that way. But then we see these brushstrokes sort of like peeling off and going into that void. And then we see like cuts of the uniform. And that's all, and all the decorations and all that. I mean, honestly, I would have liked to have seen that gold come through. Seeing that gold, his regalia, come through that darkness, that, or scarlet red, and just out instead of the outlines. And then and there almost looks like there's water droplets if you look really close enough. And those are not water droplets. Those are accents to a chain of office. But the one thing that stands out the most outside of, you're trying to get rid of it, of this concept of royalty and all this other stuff, all this pompous stuff. But the one thing that stands out the most in this dark void of red is, it almost looks like it's floating, is the medal of St. George. Well, anyway, I think that's the Order of the Garter. Somebody will correct me. Anyway, that's the most prominent thing in this whole painting, is that Order of the Garter. So going further down, past that, the belt starts fading into the uniform. And then we come down to these striking hands. Now, these hands look strange to me. They almost look like they're burnt. And almost like skin gloves. They don't look like real hands. They almost look some abstraction of hands. Leathery, and it's just, I think it's just brush strokes. But they don't look right. They don't look like hands. It looks like, and I can say this about just the skin tone and just the general, he doesn't look human in this picture. He almost looks like he's wearing a skin suit. From the face to the hands, but the hands really feel like it, is that he slipped his skin over, and he could get into the, well, he's a reptile thing. But, it doesn't make a case against it. I don't think he's a reptile, but people are going to think whatever they're going to think. But the hands don't help. They look like gloves over hands. And it's just, they don't look like they would be flexible or anything. They just look G.I. Joe hands to some extent. King Charles now with a Kung Fu grip. And then we get to the sword, which again is very prominent as the uniform fades out. Alright, things that could have been done if you wanted to go more into this abstract concept, but yet keep a interesting composition. So this is what I would do. You go from the face. I think the face is done well for what it is. Then you go into the collar. You start having that gold and inlets of the piping and all that stuff. You go into having the gold onto the shoulders, and you start going down, and where it starts going sort of down the body, you can start fading that gold off and then bringing it into that red. And then have bits of golds and within the collar sleeves. But I think what would be really striking is, other than the color of that, have the Welsh bluffing of the uniform, and I believe it's this yellowish tone, which would be on the collar. Bring out, at this point, it just looks like any old British uniform to the untrained eye. I mean, it would look like that anyway for the untrained eye, but I think it'd be more symbolic that you're using this Welsh uniform, but now have the piping and the bluffing of that uniform within the collar, and then have, like I said, the fading effect. And I think that would be striking. It would bring you more into that, here's a full-bodied person. Then I would get rid of this, do almost like solid strokes of, if you're going to continue with this red. But I would even have gone to more of a darker red, and just maybe try to put something in the background to break it up. If he's trying to be conservationist, bring in plants and stuff like that. I mean, he's done other paintings that involve plants, and with his red monochromatic scale, so it's not against him. And then maybe have something other than just this almost hyper realistic butterfly and the sea of red. I mean, that's the big thing. It's just what we're seeing is a sea of red, and it's almost somebody emerging from a flame setting. And you could almost have, like, it'd be okay, maybe have the textured background like it is, and then go in with a nice glazing of a darker red and go over that. So you would still have that odd texture, but then yet darker enough to face it away that the person is not fading into the background. And that's another thing a lot of people said about this. It looks like it's almost a statement of the artistic statement of this the monarchy is fading into the background of the British people. So this picture is coming more and more symbolic of, I think, the take that the artist is trying to say. I think maybe his bias came through. And this is always the issue with portraits. And this is why I don't do portraits. But the argument for, portraits are a very intimate section. And I was reading this book, and I think it's a great statement. Never make a portrait of somebody you love, because it's the way you see them and not how the world sees them. And I think what would have been better is, have somebody out, maybe outside of the pomp and circumstance, do this. Because right now it's coming across that this is like the last monarch. And that's where I think a lot of people are seeing, and a lot of people are connecting with, is that Charles is the fade out of the monarchy. One of his kids takes over as a monarchy. I think it would dramatically change. I'm not going to make any statements about that, but I think this lineage monarchy, this Drake lineage almost, is going to fade out. And I think that's what this portrait is portraying. All right, I hope this was somewhat interesting. Thank you for listening. Again, this is the first blah 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 art talk, and I hope that you'll enjoy this one, and I'll see you around for the next one.